Hello and welcome back to Folklore Gets Fae'd. It has been a while. It is good to see everybody. We had holiday breaks and life stuff, but we are back and we're staying back every Wednesday. So get us back on your routine. For those of you who do not know us, my name is Taylor.
I'm Vic/Karlee.
I'm Kiwi.
Today we are talking about one of all of our favorite subjects. This is a mutual favorite. We were talking about this episode before we even officially started the podcast. So this should be fun for us. We are talking about the Seelie and Unseelie Fae. For those of you who are familiar with my content, you probably have seen CL once or twice. CL is an Unseelie Fae. So I'm hoping that we can please him with this episode. And we will let you know if we don't. But yeah, let's get started. All right. So before we step into deeper corridors of Fae lore in future episodes, it helps us understand the two great social currents that shape much of fairy mythology, which is the Unseelie and Unseelie Courts, like I just mentioned. These are not rigid species or simple labels for good and evil, but they are more like frameworks that medieval Scottish and Celtic traditions used to make sense of the unpredictable, often morally complex world of the Fae. Think of them kind of like ways that humans organize stories about supernatural behavior, alliances, and temperament, rather than official governments with fixed membership. The Seelie Court is generally associated with Fae who are more inclined to coexist with humanity, at least on the surface, which we will get into later. In folklore, Seelie Fae might offer help to travelers. They may reward politeness or intervene when a human shows proper respect for old customs. That said, benevolent does not necessarily mean harmless. So that's a caveat there. Seelie beings still operate by their own logic, and their generosity often comes with expectations, unspoken rules, and consequences for those who break etiquette. From a mythological lens, the Seelie Court reflects the idea that nature and the unseen world can be cooperative, but only when approached with humility and care, like many other things in the spirit realm. The Unseelie Court, by contrast, gathers together Fae who are more openly hostile, dangerous, or indifferent to human well-being. These spirits appear in stories as night wanderers, hunters, or bringers of fear and misfortune. However, mythology rarely paints them as evil for evil's sake, and that's really important to note. Instead, Unseelie Fae often embody forces of chaos, decay, winter, and the darker aspects of the natural world. They're reminders that nature is not obligated to be kind and that some powers exist entirely outside of human moral systems. Importantly, the line between Seelie and Unseelie is not fixed. Folklore is full of tales where a Fae's behavior shifts based on circumstance, season, or how a human conducts themselves. A being who acts Seelie in one story may appear Unseelie in another. And from a mythological perspective, this kind of fluidity suggests that the courts function less as permanent identities and more as narrative lenses through which storytellers explored, I have a visitor, they explored balance, reciprocity, and consequence. The relationship between the Seelie and Unseelie courts is often described as one of tension, of opposition, and uneasy balance rather than of constant war. Some traditions suggest rivalry or seasonal conflict, while others imply a more subtle dynamic where each court defines itself in contrast to the other. In this way, the courts function kind of as two expressions of the same otherworld, light and shadow, and they kind of shape one another. Without the Unseelie, the Seelie lose their meaning, and without the Seelie, the Unseelie lack this contrast. Folklore also hints that movement between the courts is possible depending on behavior, allegiance, or the turning of the year. A Fae who aids humans under one set of circumstances may become dangerous under another. And again, this fluidity reinforces the idea that these courts are not moral absolutes, but they're more symbolic structures that reflect balance, consequence, and change. As we move through this episode, we're going to be exploring each court in greater detail, unpacking their origins, notable figures, and the cultural fears and values that they reflect. So for now, keep in mind that the Seelie and Unseelie courts are not about simplifying Fae into heroes and villains, but about understanding how ancient cultures grappled with a world that felt alive, watchful, and deeply responsive to human behavior. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my girls to share in detail about each of these groups.
Let's start with the Seelie Court. It's often described as the good fairy court, but that label hides a much deeper and more complicated truth because the Seelie weren't good in the human sense. They were lawful, orderly, and they were beautiful, and they expected to be treated as such. The Seelie Court isn't just fantasy, it's a reflection of how people once understood power, morality, and survival in a world where rules mattered and breaking them could cost you everything. To understand the Seelie Court, we need to start with a basic distinction found in Scottish and broader Celtic folklore. The word Seelie comes from the Old Scots term meaning blessed, fortunate, or happy. Oftentimes, it came to imply beings who were generally well-disposed towards humans, or at least predictable. Predictable didn't mean safe, though. It meant their behavior followed patterns you could learn, patterns you could survive if you were careful. The Seelie Court represented fairies who followed the rules. They honored bargains, they rewarded courtesy, they punished disrespect, but rarely without cause. They didn't make them kind. It made them fair in the old sense of the world, measured, balanced, and exacting. In folklore, the Seelie Court was believed to ride across the land at certain times of year, especially during liminal moments, twilight, solstice, and seasonal festivals like Beltane and Samhain. These were moments when the veil between worlds thinned and the fair folk could cross more easily into ours. To encounter them during these moments was not necessarily a blessing. It was an encounter with power, beautiful, ancient, and indifferent to human comfort. The Seelie Court doesn't originate from a single myth or text. Instead, it emerges gradually from a blend of Celtic pagan belief, medieval folklore, and later Christian reinterpretations. Early Celtic cultures believed in parallel worlds, a realm of spirits, ancestors, and divine beings called the Otherworld. This wasn't heaven or hell, but a place of abundance, danger, and strange beauty. As Christianity spread, older gods and spirits were reclassified. They became fairies, not divine, not demonic, but sometimes in between. The Seelie Court likely evolved as a way to organize these beings into something recognizable, a court, complete with hierarchy, etiquette, and law. That structure mirrored medieval human society, especially feudal systems, where loyalty and obedience defined survival. In other words, people imagined the fairy world the same way they understood their own world, ruled by nobles, governed by customs, and enforced through consequences. And it just like medieval times rulers, the Seelie Court could be generous or terrifying depending on how you behaved. At the center of the Seelie Court stands its most famous figure, the Fairy Queen. Depending on the region and the story, she's known by many names. The Queen Mab, Nick Nevin, or simply the Queen of Elhaim. She is beautiful and stunning, utterly inhumane. The queen represents sovereignty and natural order. She is tied to the land itself, its fertility, its season, and its hidden dangers. She rewards loyalty and courage, but she does not tolerate disrespect. Importantly, she is not benevolent in a maternal sense. Her kindness is conditional. her wrath is precise. It's important to emphasize here that when she punishes, it is not out of anger, but out of balance restored. In many stories, humans who catch her attention, whether through talent, beauty, or accident, are taken into the fairy realm. Sometimes they return, sometimes they don't. But when they do, time has often passed differently. These stories reflect a deep cultural fear, losing oneself to forces beyond human control, especially nature, power, or desire. The Seelie Court isn't made up of tiny sprites fluttering about aimlessly. It's populated by beings with roles and responsibilities. There are household fairies, like brownies or hobs, who are sometimes associated with the Seelie Court. These beings might help with chores or protect livestock, but only if treated with respect. Payment was expected, but never openly discussed. Gratitude was required, but not thanks. Then there are messengers and tricksters who serve the court by testing humans. These figures enforced fairy law by tempting people into breaking it, because the fairy folk, the law only matters once you've failed it. Together, these beings formed a society that mirrors human civilization by sharper, stricter, or far less forgiving. One of the most important aspects of the Seelie Court is law. Fairy law is absolute, ancient, and non-negotiable. The Seelie fairies are bound by it, and so are you, whether you know the rules or not. Some of the most common rules are never accept a gift without understanding its price, and always keep to your word. These laws reflect a cultural obsession with contracts, honor, and social obligation values that were critical in medieval societies where survival depended on trust and reputation. Breaking fairy law didn't make the Seelie Court cruel. It made them correct in punishing you. And that's part of what made them so frightening. The Seelie Court reflects order and danger. People respect the Seelie Court. The Seelie Court embodies several deep cultural anxieties. First, fear of nature, of the natural world. Nature could be generous or lethal, often without warning. The Seelie fairies represented the duality. Second, fear of social transgression. Many fairy stories punish greed, arrogance, or disrespect, especially towards guests, strangers, or the land itself. Third, fear of liminality. The danger of standing between worlds, roles, and identities. Children, travelers, artists, or young women are often the ones taken by the fair folk. These people already living at the edge of social structures. The Seelie Court reminds listeners that stepping outside your place, even briefly, could be costly. Don't worry, it's not all fear, though. The Seelie Court often reflects values that communities wanted to reinforce. Keep your promises, respect hospitality, honor the lands, and know your limits. Fairies reward politeness, humanity, and cleverness. They punish entitlement and disrespect. In this way, fairy stories functioned as moral education, especially for children wrapped in danger and wonder. Modern fantasies often soften the Seelie Court, turning it into something romantic or whimsical. But echoes of the older versions remain. Whenever you see stories about magical courts, binding oaths, beautiful but deadly rulers, or bargains that can't be broken, you're seeing the legacy of the Seelie Court. They remind us that morality isn't always about kindness. Sometimes it's about balance. Sometimes it's about consequences. The Seelie Court is not a fairy tale about good fairies or bad ones. It's a story about power that follows rules, beauty, and demands respect, and a world that operates on laws older than humanity itself. And perhaps that's why these stories endure, because even today we still fear forces that are fair but not merciful.
The word unseelie comes from the Scots in Old English, meaning unhappy, unlucky, or unholy, which is directly contrasting with Seelie. The Unseelie Court, sometimes called the Horde, the Host, consistently mostly of solitary fairies. particularly those associated with ancestral spirits and the dead. They are also ruled by the fairy queen, which we already learned about, Queen Mab. Thank you, Kiwi. According to legend, many members of the Unseelie Courts are fairies who fell out of favor or were cast out of the Unseelie Court, giving them a tragic complexity. They were not simply evil, but rather a reflection of decay, wrath, and the shadow side of existence. Unlike the Seelie, who operate with order and law, the Unseelie are unpredictable. They may follow their own rules, willing to use coercion or deception to achieve their aims. Some Unseelie are fascinated by human emotion, especially pain, love, or fear, and this can lead to strange, complicated relationships. A human might be kept around not out of affection, but out of twisted curiosity, observed almost as is under a scientific experiment. And some Unseelie are capable of genuine affection or even love, but only if the human's willing to embrace their darkness as well, becoming morally dark themselves. Sometimes it turns into a possessive fondness. The Unseelie Court was seen as constantly ready to cause harm or injury to mortals, who are avoided whenever possible. They are most active at night, supposedly winter, stormy weather, or liminal times like Samhain, where the veil between the worlds thin. While the Seelie Court may show humans kindness, romantic affection, or even guardianship, the Unseelie are often more linked to destruction or corruption. However, they aren't always what people picture when they hear evil or bad. People would have you believe the Seelie are good and the Unseelie are bad, but this can be further more than the truth. The Unseelie and Unseelie are like yin and yang, night and day, light and dark. One is darker, yes, but neither is truly good or evil. People are more scared of the cold and dark things. Unseelie and Fae are predominantly as lawful as the Seelie, but are far looser with how they go about it. They can be vague, subtle, or misleading in making deals for their benefit, or just straight up force you to repay a debt or favor with no prior warning. They are more chaotic, neutral, and lawful neutral. They are far more extroverted, wild, random, both willing and eager to flaunt themselves and their power. They do what they want, and who cares what you think about it? Both Seelie and Unseelie can be like this, like all Fae. They unfortunately have labels like we do. All Fae can be very petty, spiteful, vindictive, or entitled. Unseelie are usually associated with dark Fae, such as goblins, imps, trolls, dark elf, jellycoats, springans, redcaps, and even kelpies. They were outcast, shoved aside for being seen as not pure or ugly, and they acted accordingly. Unlike the Seelie, the Unseelie did not focus on purity, beauty, or strict bloodlines. They accepted outsiders and those cast aside. No matter how strange or unusual, which made the court incredibly diverse and inclusive, a rare trait for beings so often feared as dark or dangerous. They welcome others like themselves, taking those with mixed origins or unconventional forms. They can and do breed with many things, creating odd hybrid creatures. Most species view these offsprings as gruesome monsters, but the Unseelie Court offers them something rare, belonging or a home. These mutated mixed beings gravitate towards the Unseelie Court, which gives them an environment where peculiar appearances and abilities are normal. The Unseelie Court accepts nearly any creature into its ranks, regardless of beauty or type of species, and honestly, I respect them for that.
So the reason I was laughing so hard the entire time you're talking was because that was such an accurate description to what I have experienced in my work with CL. What's so funny about it, though, is how long it took all of us to figure out what he was when he's like textbook. Like, that is just like the CL definition, you know, like how many times have I gotten myself into a situation where Ciel offers to help me with something. Like, it's his idea. I don't ask him for help. He offers to help me with something. He's so generous. He's so kind. He's so, oh, anything for you. And then, like, he turns around after he does it with his hand out, like, okay, now you got to pay up. And it's like, it's a requirement. It's not an ask kind of thing. And so I really like how both of you described the contrast, because I think so often in folklore and mythology, it's always Seelie equals good, Unseelie equals bad. And I think there's a lot more gray on both sides than that. Like, what group of, species like the Unseelie just welcomes anyone and everyone in? Like, that's such a cool thing. Whereas, like, with the Seelie, it's like, you have to look a certain way. You have to be a certain type. You have to be pure. You have to be 100% that species. And like, there's all of these like rules and regulations to be included. Whereas with the Unseelie, they're like, you look different. You look funny. You're a little weird. You're mixed with X, Y, and Z. Like, we don't care. Come on in. And, I think that just as a species, in my experience, like when we found out that that's what Ciel was, he was like humiliated. Like, he did not want to tell us because he thought like it was over for him in our house if we knew. And I think that's just because of like the messaging that's been sent about who they are, when, dark doesn't necessarily mean evil. And I think that that's a distinction in the spirit realm that like we haven't 100%, as a society, as paranormal investigators, as, people who study folklore, anything, like, we haven't fully wrapped our heads around, like, dark does not equal evil always. You can be dark and not evil. You can be dark and not, out to ruin somebody's life. And, do they exist? Yes, they do. But there's a lot more nuance on both sides, the Seelie side and the Unseelie side. And I'm glad we took a look at both of those.
I have a story about my haunted dolls who are Unseelie. My first one, Tonwin, she wanted to be a protector, a soldier for the Queen Mab, but you had to be a man, a male, and she fought hard to prove that she wanted the job. She earned the job, but they labeled her Unseelie because of it. What she said, but life is so much more fun.
You know what?
It's so funny because, the Unseelie, they're wild. They're them versus like being very like strict. Then my other one, Bloda, which we saw in the Ishi episode, she's also Unseelie. And what she told me that the term Unseelie was when they labeled was the uncontrolled and the seekers, those who went against the current in terms of fairy hierarchy in society. Which is very true. But that's all the little small stories I have about my Unseelie.
I think those are great examples, though, right? Is because like in modern times, we label them as good and bad. But back then, it was literally just anybody who stepped out of line, said what they wanted, what role they wanted in your case, or, what was important to them. And if it didn't align with the group's goal, you were automatically an outcast. And they put you into this other group and you were forgotten about. And we only kept around those fae in the Seelie Court who not only were, perfect, but also were obedient. And, now in today's society, like, we kind of, to a degree, value disobedience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
our society is built on disobedience in some ways now. And so, if this happened in 2026, this probably would not be how things were categorized. But back in these times, that was what made sense to them. So, but Kiwi, I know you've got an Unseelie situation going over on your end.
My lovely man, Birch.
Birch.
His
so awesome.
species is technically considered Seelie. However, he was cast out of being in the Seelie Court because of his fierce independence. He rejected Queen Mab's rigid rules and was basically banished. And he's very resilient. And he, though, wasn't supposed to have forbidden books and knowledge. He had them anyway. And he kind of dreams of upending like oppressive systems, even in the Fae realm.
And he's a thief.
Yeah.
Thief.
He stole wings.
Okay, so really funny story about this though, for real. So look at this man. That man's vessel does not belong in those cute sparkly wings, okay? And around the time that Kiwi found Birch and decided to get Birch, I had gotten a new haunted doll, Ernie, who is wearing an outfit that is the exact color of those wings. And she is a fae and she didn't have wings. And her vessel looks like it should have wings. It's like light blue and sparkly and purple. And like, she doesn't have wings. And so the second I saw him, and they were like the same week, I was like, are those Ernie's wings? And so I go to Ernie. She's got nothing to do with the Seelie Unseelie situation. She's from a totally different time and place. But
Yep.
regardless, I go to her and I'm like, hey, yeah, we know he stole those wings from somebody. Were those your wings? Well, she wanted new wings, but she was new and she's very, very polite and she didn't want to just outright ask me for wings. So she basically pretends that these are her wings. She's like, oh, they might be. That could be them. Like, totally pretending like these were her wings. We come to find out they were not her wings, but Birch stealing those wings turned into Ernie getting her own wings, ended up getting her wings for Christmas. But it was just hysterical because I was like dead set. I was like, Birch, you stole my girl's wings. Like, I'm gonna come for you.
We're gonna need them back.
They were not her wings.
No, they weren't. They were another Fae's wings. And she is upset about it for sure. I asked the previous keeper about that Fae. Yeah, she's not happy. So for sure cannot have both of them in my house.
But like, Birch ain't evil. Birch
He
follows no
wanted
laws. Birch makes his own laws.
He just wanted to swag out.
Purple sparkly wings.
See, he could have waited and I could have gotten him his own wings. But he decided to steal some before he got here. So now they're like glued on, like hot glued on. So even if I wanted to, they're on there, buddy. You ain't
He looks
getting.
fresh. So, you know.
He just wanted to swag out.
He's
Exactly.
styling.
He's not bothering anybody. He's just looking fresh now. But yeah, so Birch stealing those wings from somebody else turned into Ernie getting wings, which turned into Haro also getting wings, which is a whole weird situation. But that is so besides the point. We can't even talk about him this episode because we'll go down a rabbit hole. He's a story for a different day. But that is a wrap on the Seelie and the Unseelie Fae. I hope that was enlightening for you guys. I know that just fairy stories in general are very polarizing. You know, you always hear the worst of them and not the full story. And so I hope this was a little bit more information to give you a deeper dive into each of these groups and what it meant to be categorized in this way. And for my personal goal of this episode, which sometimes my personal goal is different than the overarching episode purpose, but my personal goal in this is that people would see that there's a lot more depth to the Unseelie Fae in particular. I think the Seelie Fae are very well educated on. There's a lot out there about them, and the Unseelie, it's just like, well, these are their evil twins pretty much, and then like the story ends there. And people don't talk about the inclusivity of that, and you know, those spirits who were like some of the ones you guys talked about that just like simply didn't want to play by the rules, but really didn't actually do anything wrong. So I hope that in particular came across in this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We are back to a regular schedule. So not next week, but the week after that, we will have another live premiere on Wednesday. We hope you're enjoying this, and until next time, we'll catch you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.